that one job as a business analyst had set me apart straight away. And it wasn't
Yeah.
because I was anything better. It's just the fact that I did it. And this is
Yeah.
what's so interesting. People are thinking so linearly in terms of like,
Mm.
oh, you have to get the grad program, and then the grad program, you get the associate program. Whereas that's just not the reality. You actually don't
Mm.
have to follow that path. So this is
Yeah.
a really cool alternative because
Yeah.
you do get to lease out your skills and build up that experience. Let's do this. We're back for a second podcast. Somil, it's been a long time since we recorded. I think the last time was in August, roughly August, I think it was. I remember being incredibly ill at the time. I remember I had a really bad flu, and I was traveling, and I was coming
Wow.
back, and I remember I was like, I need to get this podcast in, and we did like an early session like today as well, and I remember it was great afterwards because like that's the thing when you're recording so frequently, you have so many episodes to record that I remember we just kind of banged through everything in like an hour or so. It was good from that perspective because it was kind of like always geared around young professionals. And I suppose today is going to be something similar as well.
Absolutely, Darren. It's great to be back. Yeah, I mean, I really enjoyed the session last summer. And I'm really sorry to hear that you were ill at that time. I did not realize that. So you were very, very smooth. So well done on that. And and hopefully you feel better now. Yeah, I mean, time flies when you're having fun. That was sort of the time that we had just launched. I had just launched my new business. And yeah, I mean, it's been a great 6 or 7 months. So hopefully today I can talk a little bit more around what we are building, how it's going, and so on.
Class, yeah. So what have you been up to? So what was the plan? What was the idea since we last spoke?
Yeah, that's right. So actually, slightly before we last spoke, so about 10, 12 months ago, me and some of my colleagues, we started looking at really what is the future of work, as it were. The starting point of our conversation was that if I think of my grandfather, he worked for the same organization for his entire career, right?
Hmm.
From a 20-year-old lad to when he retired when he was 60 or whatever. He worked for the same organization. He worked in a university. My father, on the hand, has worked for lots of different companies, but in the same industry. And he always worked for, one job at a time. For me, for example, if I look back on things that I have done in my career, I've worked in lots of different industries. So, I've worked in banking, I've worked in consulting, I've worked in startups and technology, and that's very, very common when I sort of look around my friends and so on. And then looking forward, the question is, how does this movement of more flexibility and more change, how does it get digested in the world of work? So looking from the point of view of a young professional, who I know is the sort of the main target sort of market or the focus area, not just that, but that is one of the main focus areas for your podcast. So the question really was, how would we like to work? And 5 years from now, 10 years from now, how would people like to create their career? And what we're seeing more and more, what we saw is a greater degree of desire to work in a freelancing sort of mode, where you can take a greater degree of control over your work life, really. So not having to kind of clock 9 to 5 or whatever, and have your entire day, and sometimes the nights and the weekends as well, driven by your boss or your employer, but really having more control over your life. And that's a very, very important thing that people want to achieve. So how do we really create pathways where people can have meaningful careers, they can have skills development, they can have the association and the network effects that you get out of working in organizations in a structured fashion, but at the same time allow people a little bit more control over their career path and so on. So that's a desire that we saw. And to a great extent, we see that sort of model, that freelancing kind of model happening in many industries already. So
Yeah.
professions like professions like content marketing, in digital marketing, in UI UX, and certain kind of development. See that in blockchain development. We see that in some of the machine learning development. So certain kind of software development kind of roles and marketing
Mhm.
roles. We see that sort of flexibility already happening with lots of platforms like Upwork and TopTal. And we kind
And
of said, okay, yeah,
what's
go
really
on.
interesting with that as well is the fact that like it went from being very non-structured, so a lot of people
Mm,
that were freelancers didn't want to work like a full-time job, whatever, but
yeah,
now they have the opportunity to go and do it. And I can even think of even my partner in particular, works as a freelancer, earns as much money, if not more, than most of these other 9 to 5 jobs, which is crazy when you think about the hours that goes
Yeah.
into it. But what
Yeah.
I love about the work that you always do, and it was Colin originally who originally got me on the path of your stuff, was that you're always thinking like ahead.
Yeah.
It's a
Yeah.
really cool trait to have, because I don't think a
Mm,
lot of people say that they want to think ahead, but not a lot of people actually do it.
mm,
But what
yeah.
you've been able to do, I think, is think in the mindset of someone like myself, a 25-year-old
Mm,
guy who does have the desire to work. Like, there's no two ways about that. We do enjoy working, but it's a
yeah.
different model. And
Yeah.
to say that we're particularly lazy or whatever for not wanting to be in the office is just fundamentally wrong, because of the
Yeah.
fact that we have more flexibility to do other stuff. And this is why it's very interesting, because like in my example, and we can use me as an example throughout this as well.
Mm,
Like, I
mm,
work in Rev. I love Revolut. I think it's a great company, but I also like to do the other stuff on the side. I like to have my own podcast. I like to have a bit more flexibility. I like to be remote working. And
yeah.
that's kind of interesting, because that kind of goes at odds to what you would traditionally would have seen in Canary Wharf or New York, of guys, coming into the office 7 o'clock in the morning, leaving at 6, 7 in the evening, if even.
Yeah.
And yeah, kind of to your point about your father or whatever, committing to that particular role and company. So it's
Yeah.
it's very interesting, and that's why it's cool for this purpose of the conversation to see like what you're doing to essentially serve
Yeah.
that market.
Yeah, no, that's right. So we kind of said that, and by the way, it's not just people of a certain age. So it's not just people who are 25 or 30 or 20 years old who want to do this. We see that in people of all ages. The desire for more flexibility and more control. That's a fundamental human trait.
Mhm.
And in the past, it was really not feasible. But today, with the help of technology and access and so on, that sort of thing is feasible. So we launched a platform called Project Brains, and we launched it in July last year. So around the time that we last spoke. And really, it's a two-sided marketplace between specialists who have the need, the desire, and the ability to work on what we call a fractional basis, and high growth businesses who are really ambitious and who are growing really fast and do not want to wait around and go through the long term recruitment process, but really want to hit the market faster. So that's a perfect alignment of needs. On one side, the business who wants to move faster and in a more flexible way. And on the other side, a specialist who's got a set of skills which are transferable. And they have the willingness and the ability to apply that to multiple companies in multiple industries. And this could be exactly as you say. This could be a model where you do multiple such gigs at the same time and thus create your work life. Or it could be a situation where you have a main gig in life, and that could be a job, a business. Maybe you're looking for a job. That could be studying. So a lot of members of our platform are students, or family. There could be many different things that could be a main gig, and then you augment that with one or two side gigs. So both of these models we see sort of emerging on our platform. Yeah.
That's cool. What I always like to think about in terms of this as well is like when people say, "Oh yeah, you offer your services like a side gig." If you can make 500 quid or 1,000 quid a month, that's potentially life changing, because like how
Yeah.
much is rent in London? Like average price,
Yeah.
maybe say $800. If you were able
Yeah.
to get to that stage, and that's how I always thought about my own kind of side gigs, is the fact that don't think of it in terms of the small money for the time you put in, even though your time on your platform is pretty even, because like you do a job, you get paid for it. And this is why I always kind of encourage younger people as well to kind of put that time in, because they're able to do it. And I think that's what's a big pain point, is the fact that younger people don't realize that they have specialized skills that they can offer. Now, again, you need a certain criteria, no doubt about that, but you just need to be a couple of rungs ahead in the ladder for you to go and offer your services to people. And that's
Yeah.
what's pretty cool. If people on the other end of your marketplace are demanding, let's say, I don't know, a designer or a marketer, good is a good example, you could fill that gap on a, I don't know, intern basis or whatever. So do you see kind of a big kind of uptake in it? Is it a change of kind of mentality for younger people?
Yeah, absolutely. So we think of specialists as sort of having three main reasons why they should be or could be on our platform. One is around sort of professional outcomes. So exactly as you say, even if it's £500,000 a month, that could be a very significant amount of money, which sort of allows you, gives you options that you otherwise would not have had, right? So that, of course, money is one part of it, but also you're using your transferable skills in new and creative ways that adds value to your CV. So maybe it helps you get a better next job, for example, or it gives you more experience that you would need at some point of time to start your own business, or do something else in your life, right? So there are a lot of professional advantages: adding value to CV, the money, adding skills, practicing your skills. A lot of professional advantages. There are also personal benefits, right? So very often, and I've seen this myself, if I think back as a 25-year-old working in a company, that company, that job, the project that I'm doing for the company, that sort of takes over the entire mind. It becomes very, very difficult to kind of see yourself as a person with flexibility, with agency. You kind of become really a cog in the big wheel, that sort of thing. If you remember the Charlie Chaplin movie, Modern Times. So it's about that personal development as well. Putting yourself in situations which are new, which are different, where you have the core skills, but you need to apply them. That's sort of hugely developmental from a personal point of view. Also, things like network building, right? If you work in a company, you work with your colleagues, and you know people in that company. But if you're getting exposed to people in other companies, in other businesses, you're expanding your network, and that's a personal benefit too. So it's around skills, it's around network building, it's around really adding to your brand equity. And finally, passion, right? I mean, so one of the persons who was an early specialist in our platform, um, they had an interesting point of view. They basically said, look, I've worked in a big bank for 10 plus years, and lots of different exciting things. And that's what they will continue, because, they enjoyed the job, and, it paid the bills, and it was a high powered career and everything. But they sort of said, the big thing that's happening in the world of finance today is ESG and green finance. And I want to work in that area. But I can't do that because, I've got this job in this big bank, and that's what I need to do. And there's got nothing to do with ESG and green finance. Of course, I can try and find that new job in ESG and green finance in that institution or a different institution. But how much easier for me to try and work with an ESG or green finance company, which is looking for my transferable skills, experience that, see if I enjoy it, and really do something that I'm passionate about, test it out in a lower risk environment before committing full time to it. So yeah, professional, personal, passion, those are the three reasons why we see specialists of all ages, of all backgrounds kind of coming to our platform.
And that's great as well, because like a lot of people will not get that exposure. And we'll get into, we actually, if we have time, we'll get into ESG, because I read your article on it yesterday, start to
Yeah.
finish this morning,
Yeah,
and I loved it. It's a big area that I'm working on as well at the moment.
Mm.
But just digging in some of those areas, so the experience element for younger people. Now you
Mm.
always see those fucking those posts on LinkedIn being like, oh, I don't have
Mm.
enough experience for these roles. This is how you do it. This is actually
Exactly.
literally, if you get out, you get into it. From my own experience, I remember I did my internship. It was good. I went back to Ireland at the time. I wanted more experience. I was in final year of college. I needed more experience, and I knew that if I had it, it would set me apart. I worked
True.
for a small fintech company called Newarka. Great guy,
Mm.
Paul, brought me on board. I was only there for like 6, 7 months, but it was
Mm.
great because
Yeah.
that one job as a business analyst had set me apart straight away. And it wasn't
Yeah.
because I was anything better. It's just the fact that I did it. And this is
Yeah.
what's so interesting. People are thinking so linearly in terms of like,
Mm.
oh, you have to get the grad program, and then the grad program, you get the associate program. Whereas that's just not the reality. You actually don't
Mm.
have to follow that path. So this is
Yeah.
a really cool alternative, because
Yeah.
you do get to lease out your skills and build up that experience as well as a network. I built a podcast just to build a network essentially, and that's one thing that I was able to do. And again, the opportunities that come from that are profound. Like, people look down at the word network, especially because it's very like, trying to essentially like smooch with people, but that's not actually the idea. The idea is that you
Mm.
actually just align with people that you're actually genuinely interested in. You
Yeah.
learn a tremendous amount from them, and then
Yeah.
you can have long-term partnerships or whatever. So that's the stuff that people don't get exposure to, because as you said, you get siloed into your particular job, you get used to doing the same stuff every day, and you can get stuck. And getting stuck is a very, very difficult rut to get out. No, I still don't think that I think the concept of being stuck you put on yourself. I feel when people say, oh, I can't move industry and stuff, I
Mm.
feel that's very much not self-inflicted, but people like look at it from a negative perspective. Whereas how I would look at this is say, look, I have a lot of experience in X. I want to move into Y. Let's try find those similarities. But yeah, I don't know. I think we need more people to think this like level of granularity, because otherwise you
Yeah.
can fall into those difficult scenarios.
Yeah, and that I mean, moving industry or moving locations, those are the sort of things that hopefully, that's the theory, our platform also makes it easier. Because, if I'm in one location, if I'm in the UK, as an example, and I'm working in a bank or an insurance company or whatever, but what I'm doing, there's a content to my job. There's a professional part to my job. That could be business analysis. That could be project management. That could be product management. Maybe I'm doing a lot of client surveys. Maybe I'm doing a lot of regulatory analysis. Whatever it is, there's a professional element to the job, and then there is a location element to my job, and there's a company or a sector element to my job, and if whatever it is that I want to change, right? So I want to apply my regulatory analysis skills, but not to insurance in the UK, but to, I don't know, banking in Switzerland, right? It's possible because, a lot of what you do is transferable. It's about reading the rules, applying it in the context of a business, and then sort of deriving some requirements out of it, building some technology, some operations in order to fulfill those rules and so on. But how do you do that? It's extremely hard, because you don't have the social capital, which is another word that I often use for network, in Switzerland, in the banking sector. The people that you come across are insurance in the UK. But on our platform, you could sort of come up as a specialist in regulatory analysis, regulatory project roadmaps, whatever it is really, regulatory process design and things like that. And then it becomes easier for you to find someone in your target industry, in your target location, and use your transferable skills. So that's the sort of thing, that sort of unpeeling of the onion is what we see becoming more and more important. And our platform, Project Brains, through that we kind of make a small contribution. I mean, another theme to highlight, and this is probably more from an American point of view, but it does apply in UK and Europe, UK, Ireland, and Europe, is around this whole thing around the Great Resignation, right? Where people kind of say, okay, what we were doing pre-pandemic is not exactly, which is what's giving us satisfaction and a good mix of professional and personal outcomes. And we want to change that. And again, that's again sort of a trend that we sort of saw playing into the build out of our platform, where we sort of see people who are looking to do something different, looking for a change, maybe in location, maybe in sector, maybe in company, maybe in the profession, but they have other things. So allowing that sort of transfer to happen in a lower risk fashion, that's what we're trying to enable.
It's cool because this is what a marketplace does, is bring that other counterparty to them, and that's a challenge with online businesses. For me,
Yeah.
I run a small consulting firm which is around podcasting. I also do a lot of career mentoring, and
Yeah.
often people will always ask, what's the biggest challenge? And the biggest challenge is often finding people, is often finding clients.
Yeah.
But for someone like myself who has a podcast, who's always pretty active, I can kind of get those inbound opportunities, or at least I can spread my wings to extend with people. But if you're starting completely dry, that's the difficulty. And when you said
Yeah.
social capital, that's very interesting too, because that's what it is. The ability to offer your services and build up with a good network is very, very challenging. And I think people struggle. And you said something cool about location too. So if you are to move, I know a lot of people that move from Ireland to the UK or UK to Australia or whatever, people feel that when they move, they're actually going to go backwards. When in fact, it's not necessarily the case, but it's the fact that the connections you have locally aren't there internationally anymore. And that's what's nice about even like your platform, or a platform that's even similar, is the fact that if you can build up some of that kind of social capital, then you can start building a more network that's international and more global. And I think that's how you should think about it, instead of like local kind of geography even. So that's the idea.
That's right. I mean, location is just one of the vectors, really, is what I think. Yeah. I mean, one thing which I would say, I mean, Project Brains itself is we are ourselves a startup, right? We're 6-7 months in the market. So right now, our focus is on sort of two geo sectors. One is UK domestic. So, a UK business, a UK specialist working together through our platform, using transferable skills and so on. And the second is UK inbound, or European inbound, sort of, which is an Australian company or an Asian company or an American, African company looking to enter the European market. And sometimes they'll have UK as the first port of call. Sometimes it'll be Ireland, sometimes Switzerland. They have different sort of first ports of call. But somebody international wanting to enter Europe, or sometimes what we've also worked with is, say, an Eastern European company, or or a Swiss company which is wanting to enter UK or Ireland. So basically the inbound business and the domestic business, those are the ones that we are focused on right now. But of course, over time, as we expand, we totally would like to connect people in Ireland who want to go and work in Australia. So hopefully it'll become like a two-way thing as well.
Yeah, of course. And that's just the idea about building a platform. And that's why it's so
Yeah,
challenging at first, because you
yeah,
need
yeah,
both people on that side. One thing I want to ask you on this was about the any potential issues or risks around that. So you're a finance guy, you know about risk. So if you are, let's say, someone like myself who works in fintech and I wanted to work with other companies, um, you often, I don't know how it is actually is in the law, but basically a lot of times you actually can't. Sometimes it might stay in your contract. You can't work for multiple different employers.
yeah.
How do you get around issues like that for individuals who want to offer their services elsewhere?
Yeah, I mean, look, our goal is not to get around restrictions, limitations, which could be legal or contractual. Working with our platform makes it possible for individuals to really analyze their situation, their legal situation, their contractual situation. We provide, in the terms and conditions, we provide the guidance about if you are a person in this situation, what you can and cannot do. So there is a bit of advice or bit of direction that you get using the platform. If, for example, your employment contract prohibits you from doing this activity, well, then on our platform, we would recommend the same thing. It's just about thinking those things through in a structured fashion. There are also more subtle things like, if you are a medical professional, then you can and cannot do certain things. If you work in the government sector, then you can and cannot do certain things. So that sort of level of granular level of let's say terms, conditions, and those are the sort of things that the platform, I suppose,
Mhm.
makes it easier. Ultimately, of course, people have to take the right decision and not missell, not oversell. I mean, all of those things are sort
Mhm.
of human behavior. But at least the platform can provide the the guardrails to avoid making mistakes or to act without knowing the full details of the contractual or the legal situation.
Yeah, it's only interesting because of the fact that like someone will overstate it, and maybe
Mm,
you actually could, or you could do
mm.
something different.
Yeah.
So it may not be directly you can work with them, but you could do something else. So if it is like product work and you wanted to work on some sort of different kind of basis, you could potentially set up those arrangements. But it's good to kind of get some clarity on it before you do anything, I suppose.
Yeah. Also, very often, and this is general advice, right? It's always good to consult, right? So if you are in a permanent long-term employment, and you want to offer your transferable skills to a company in a different sector, obviously not a competitor, probably in a like I said, in a different geography or in a different industry sector or whatever. It's always good to consult. What we always recommend is go and talk to people in your company. Go and talk to your boss to say, hey, I would like to do this on the side. Is that okay? Is there a restriction, even if it's not on paper? Is there a restriction in spirit? And people appreciate that. When we have specialists who work in really large organizations, big banks, big consulting companies, and all that, and they take their approvals. They take their approvals internally, and actually, very often, you bring back value to the large company as well, because you as an individual, if you're applying your transferable skills in a different sector, so you work in, let's say, banking sector, and you're applying your skills in, I don't know, some other sector which is trying to kind of expand, and you're sort of saying you know how to set up a business in Ireland, as an example, Dan. And you are now helping, a company which is making widgets, or which is running an e-commerce platform, in how to set up in Ireland. You are practicing your skills. That adds to you as an individual, and that then adds to your value as a full-time employer of the company as well. So yeah, I mean, very often, our suggestion is, look, if you're not sure, then just consult with your employer or with your current partner, and make sure that they're in the loop. That they know what kind of work you're doing and why you're doing it and how you're doing it,
Mhm.
and they appreciate that. And not always, but very often you would get the approval to do that, and then there is no doubt.
Yeah, again, you can just get clarity. That's the main thing, and that's what
Yeah,
people kind of lack. They would more often people would shy away from doing something instead of just asking, getting clarity, and that's why
yeah.
always just asking is always a better approach. approach, you know.
Yeah. Also, I mean, one of the reasons, and this is a pretty obvious thing, but this was part of our thinking on the platform. One of the reasons why both people, specialists, as well as businesses, would not do this is because the admin around it is very complicated, right? Keeping track of it and the paperwork, and even if you have to ask, if somebody say, "Oh, can you show me how you'd be doing it? What your terms and conditions are?" All of those things become really, really complicated. And that's something that the platform can handle, just using technology, right? To say, okay, if your boss says, yeah, okay, this may be possible, can you show me what you'll be doing? You can just show them the Project Brains website. Say, well, I'll be using this platform, and you can look at the terms and conditions and the intellectual property separation, and all sorts of things, the indemnity, all of those sort of things, and that can give them a bit of confidence. And the invoicing, the tracking, and the contracts, all of that you do not have to do by hand. And that also makes certain things possible, which probably were not possible if you have to kind of do it in an ABC sort of step-by-step fashion yourself.
100%. Yeah,
Yeah.
100%. I even noticed that when even my own contracts,
Mm,
if I'm working with a brand or a company, um, for podcasting, I know like the contract process is just kind of so long and it just takes a
mm,
bit of time, and
mm,
it goes back and forth, and then you want to make sure everything's like, all the I's are dotted, all the T's are crossed, and it's all
mm.
those kind of individual stuff. So if you can essentially automate all that stuff and do it on the behalf of the client, on behalf of the customer, on behalf of the user, it's hugely helpful,
Yeah, yeah,
So I want to discuss from the employer side, so from the business, and so the problem statement is that a business wants to hire someone to fill a particular role. Let's say it's UX related, or it could be graphic design related. Generally, the startup or scale up or whatever particular business may not need the employee on a full time basis. So at that point, they would potentially look for someone like yourself, or someone who's a contractor. What
yeah.
would be the advantage in picking someone off this platform versus like a contractor?
Yeah. So here's the thing, right? Very often, businesses also think in the way that they have been trained to think, or the mental limitations that have been given to them through history, right? So the starting point always is, I have a need, therefore I have a job spec, right? So that's the way, 80% or so of the businesses that we start working with think. Um, First challenge for us is working with the business to help them think one step further. What business problem are they trying to solve, right? So
Hmm.
got into the stage where they've decided the business problem they want to solve. They've decided the best way to do that is through an employee. Then they should kind of go ahead and find an employee, whether it's a full time or a contractor or whatever kind of works for them. Um, but very often, when they take that step back and kind of say what business problem they're trying to solve, then the answer is not, I want to get a full time employee, but the answer is they want to bring a set of skills and capacities in their organization which will solve those business problems. So I'll take an example. We talked about market entry as one of the propositions that we have. So we were working with a design house, actually. So nothing to do with technology or whatever, but really a boutique design house, which is doing really well in France and Paris. So they have a couple of boutiques in Paris. They've done pop-ups in New York, in London, in Tokyo, in Hong Kong. So they've done pop-ups sort of around the world, and they've sold well. And now they're basically saying, okay, so there is latent demand for our product around the world. Right now we are in Paris. They have a website and they do some online business as well. They do not want to get into multi-party platforms because they think that sort of devalues their brand somewhat. So that's a different sort of strategy, that the marketplaces and all that is a different strategy that they're considering. But they said, we do want a physical presence in the UK as a part of our expansion journey because there's enough demand, and so. So we started talking to them and sort of said, okay, what do you need? They say, oh, we need a head of UK. So, well, really, are you sure you need a head of UK? What you really need, perhaps, is what's going to be your strategy to sell in the UK. Yeah. And that strategy could be setting up a boutique, just like you have in Paris. And that boutique could be in London. And over time, it could be in Edinburgh and Manchester or whatever, depending on where the demand is. Or maybe your strategy would be to sell online more, promote your current website, and so on, a little bit more in the UK market, build up demand, and then decide whether you want a boutique or not. Or maybe your strategy is to work on a multi-party platform in the Okay, there are multiple options, and then even within a boutique, do you want an independent boutique, which is the kind that you have in Paris, or do you want to at least kind of get some footfall and so on? Maybe you want to kind of open in a Selfridges or something like that, something which already has got a physical platform, and then you ride on that somewhat. So there you have multiple options, and depending upon the option you choose, you need a very, very different person on the ground. If you're running a boutique, you need somebody who's really good at running a boutique. If you're trying to promote it online to direct more UK traffic to your e-commerce site, then you need somebody who's really good at sort of promoting, an e-commerce proposition. And these are very different people. And trying to say that your single head of UK is going to be able to do all of these things equally well as needed, that's very hard, because I mean, people are multi-skilled, multi-talented, but nobody can be perfect at so many diverse things, really.
Yeah.
So and they agreed. So it's okay. The first problem that we really need is we need the market entry strategy, feasibility strategy, whatever it is. Then what we need, depending upon then what we've come out, then then we will need different people at different points of time, different capacities. So taking that step back and then kind of saying, what problems am I trying to solve? What's going to be the timeline of solving those problems suddenly changes your business need. Suddenly you don't really have a hiring requirement for a permanent or a contract person. Suddenly you're saying, well, I'm trying to solve these series of problems, and let me get a specialist who can solve my first problem, create my feasibility or market entry strategy, then maybe solve my second problem, which could be a second specialist, which is directing more traffic to my e-commerce site out of the UK. And then a third problem, which is maybe doing a more extended pop-up, in cooperation with some other company or agency. And then the fourth problem, which is where I would be ready for a full-time or contract hire, where I'm running my own store full-time, right? So it is kind of, your next 6 months or your next 9 months look very, very different once, you can take a step back. And again, the business could not have done it without a platform like ours, because, there's no way that the business owner would have said, I'm going to do 5 different things over the next 6 months or 1 year in order to kind of do this, because they would just not have the capacity or the time to do it, because they're busy doing other things too. Again, through the platform, it becomes a lot easier to kind of do a shorter term, single problem solving kind of an engagement. Hopefully it goes well. And then you do the second one, the third one. So that sort of thing, really. Once you take the step back and kind of say, what are your true business needs? What are problems you're trying to solve? The answer starts to look very different to saying, I want to get a full-time or a contract hire. Does that make sense?
It makes perfect sense, because no one's ever thinking about exact problem statement. And I only really learned that when I started moving to fintech, was about
Yeah.
what's the actual issue we're trying to solve. This could be beyond resourcing, and
Yeah.
then looking at logical steps to actually resolve a single pain point, a single problem, and that
Yeah.
may involve hiring someone that's on a specialized basis. That's a very,
Yeah.
very short term, and
Yeah.
traditional finance or consulting or firms would have hired someone that's a long-term employee in those
Yeah.
instances. And
Yeah.
there's so much baggage that comes with that.
Yeah.
Healthcare, insurance, all that kind of stuff. I don't even know what it is. So if you're able to extrapolate what your issues are and then what you need to solve, well, then you've just saved yourself so much money on resourcing.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
that's what's so interesting, because a lot of these companies, especially outside of fintech, don't have the same requirement. Fintech or finance, sorry, don't have the
Mm.
same requirements as regular kind of businesses.
Mm.
So that instance, a design company who are doing heavy focused design, they don't have the same requirements of having a chief compliance officer that's sitting on the
Mm.
board for
Yeah.
12 months a year.
Yeah.
They just need someone to get it up and running. And essentially diversify their resourcing risk, because they're
Yeah.
able to get more people.
Yeah.
And you made a great point about the head of UK analogy. So people will often assume that one person can do everything, whereas that's not the function of specialized people. They
Yeah.
should be doing particular skills and then
Yeah.
moving on. I had a discussion with someone recently enough, and talking about my own experience. And they were saying that, you don't know much about this, you don't know much about that. But I was also thinking in my head, I was like, well, I don't necessarily need to know all these particular areas. If I can
Mm.
drill in on ABC, then
Yeah.
DEF, I can potentially get someone else to do it.
Yeah.
And I think that's definitely a generational shift as well, because
Yeah.
before it could have been dumped on you to start this company, build a company, do marketing, do sales,
Mm.
do everything.
Yeah, no, that's right, and that's what sort of ultimately kind of this dump on everything kind of thing. It can be a great challenge, and people grow into challenges, and that's great. That's
Yeah, that's good.
that's hugely beneficial. But equally, if you're doing things which are not really in your sweet spot, which you probably don't feel passionate about, which you're not interested in, right? Just that's the sort of thing that leads to burnout and the great resignation and so on. That's not good for the business and definitely not good for the individual. So yeah, sort of breaking it up. And again, I mean, I say this again, you kind of need technology to kind of orchestrate all of this, right? Because otherwise, an individual or a business owner or a business manager acting on their own will just find it too difficult to kind of do that, right? Because then every single thing can be broken up into 10 different things, and then you're keeping track of 10 different relationships, 10 different contracts. All of that is very difficult. But if that kind of goes through a platform where huge amount of self-service, and then you can kind of orchestrate that sort of virtual team or a
Yeah.
flexi team for you, then you can be a lot more effective too as a business owner. So that's the primary sale, really, solving your real business problems, as opposed to
Mhm.
saying, look, this is cheaper or whatever. I mean, sometimes it is cheaper, sometimes it's more expensive. On a per hour basis, it is perhaps more expensive. But again, another thing that we specialize in is that we're not really a guns for hire kind of platform. What we really talk about is business needs, expected outcomes. How can those outcomes be achieved? What's the value, commercial value of that outcome, and then making sure that the specialist gets a share in that commercial value. So let's say a business says, look, I'm a software company, I'm entering the UK market, I already do some business with Barclays Bank or whatever, and my goal is to expand that. Right now, I do 2 projects a year, and I think I've got the capacity and the skills to do 5 projects a year. I need somebody who will manage that account and go from 2 to 5. So it's okay. That's your key goal. Does not need to be somebody who's working, in your office, real or physical or virtual, all the time, but somebody who can help you move from 2 projects to 5 projects, or 2 engagements to 5 engagements. You can have a full-time person, or you can break up the requirement and have 3 fractional specialists who will attack the client needs, Barclays Bank in this case, from 10 different angles. And then your probability of finding those 3 new projects goes up, because you're sort of attacking the client needs from lots of different angles, as opposed to having one person who kind of can explore 2 or 3 different sort of avenues to get you new business.
Mhm.
And you don't really, because everyone is working on a fractional basis, you don't really need to pay their full-time salary and all that. So your budget can actually extend to get a larger number of specialists. You expand your presence in the market. There is more buzz about you in the market, and those are sort of additional benefits. What's more, our typical contract, typical engagement on our platform has got some element of retainership and some element of outcomes based pricing. So if you get the contract, then there is a commission, the bonus or whatever. That's what the business has to pay. That's what the specialists receive, and then on an ongoing basis, it's a much smaller retainership. So again, so it's not about sort of comparing an employee or contractor or a consultant price sort of model to ours. It's really about how can we blow it up and make it more effective for both the specialists and the businesses. So
Yeah.
again, breaking up the business need into its constituent parts, making sure the best specialist is working on the best element of the need, and then aligning the incentives to more outcomes based rather than time based or input based.
Mhm.
Those are the kind of benefits that typically attract businesses to our platform.
It's cool. The pricing is very sensitive topic because
Mm,
when it's a contract or when it's full time, like people say, like, what's the real value of work and how do you
mm,
value it? And then there's also an element of, well, if it's outcome based, it doesn't matter if it takes me a day or a month, I should still be getting paid on the outcome base.
mm,
So how do you really value like the kind of commercial viability of it? And I'll give you a bit of context. So like my fees for podcasting, in particular for consulting, you know, will be based on my restrictive time. So because I'm very restricted on my time, if I was to do 5 hours a week or whatever, like it will be very, very expensive because of the fact that I don't necessarily have the extra time to do all this extra work. So I've seen myself kind of elevate fees. And if anyone ever asks me, why is it priced at this stage, I say it's due to the lack of time that I have. Um, But for other people or for your platform, like how do you find that price point? How
Yeah,
is that really
yeah.
achieved?
Yeah, to be honest, there is no one price point or one set of rules that apply to all sectors, all companies, all business needs, all specialists, right? Because there is a huge variety. On the whole, our platform does provide a great degree of flexibility for the business and specialists to agree the model that works for them. Uh, but our advice always is have these two elements. One, some degree of retainership, right? So what we don't want to do is to have situations where we kind of create a race to the bottom or anything like that, right? So we want to attract good specialists, really. And for a specialist to have a loyalty to a business and vice versa, for a business to kind of value the specialist, we feel that some degree of retainership, retain agreement is very important. So it's not really one shot and you're out, but there is some degree of continuity, some degree of retainership, right? So and then the second thing that we say is outcomes, right? What are the outcomes on which the business and the specialists will work together? And if those outcomes are achieved, there should be some degree of bonus, really, because that creates the incentives for both the business and the specialists to focus on the right thing. So in the podcasting example that you mentioned, and again, every situation is different, but our general sort of direction there would be that if a podcasting specialist is working with an organization that wants to create their own series of podcasts, so whatever it is really, then there is, and they sort of say, okay, we're going to have some kind of a strategy, build up some sort of a pipeline, and actually execute and get to the stage 2 months from now or whatever, where three podcasts have been issued, they have been published, another two have been recorded but not yet published, something like that. So that's the outcome that we are moving towards, and that outcome has got certain amount of value. So that's what we would say, that for this period of 2 months there should be some sort of a fixed retainership that the specialists get, whatever happens, because that's the way to pull the specialist's loyalty towards the business, and for the business to kind of feel that they are paying money to the specialist and therefore they should get some value out of it, right? As opposed to, well, you're not really paying anything. If something comes out, great, we'll pay for that. Otherwise, no skin off our nose. That's not a good situation to be in. So some degree of retained agreement, plus an agreement which sort of says, well, the goal is to create 5 podcasts and publish 3. And if this is achieved sooner, great, the project ends sooner, and the bonus is paid out sooner. If it takes a little bit longer, then, well, the specialist has put in a little bit more effort, but ultimately achieve those outcomes. And if a higher outcome is achieved, which creates even greater value for the business, then an extra bonus is paid out. So that's the way we would sort of recommend, right? Some small degree of retainer, and some sort of outcomes-based fee, which says, if 5 podcasts is received, the bonus is X. If 7 is received, then the bonus is 50% more. Or only 3 are received, the bonus is 50% less. Whatever it is. Some sort of an outcome fee. And generally, because you are the specialist, you know how you would sort of create this series of podcasts and all that. So you can actually sort of say, yeah, I can do that. This is how I can fit my time. This is how I'll best use my 5 hours a week or 2 hours a week or whatever you have, in order to still achieve the outcomes. You're able to kind of, again, take greater control on the day-to-day activity, as opposed to saying, well, I must do a 5-hour timesheet this week, next
Exactly.
week, and the week after next. So that's the way that we always recommend pricing, and that works really well in the domains that we cover right now are sales, business development, and that includes account management, indirect sales, channel partnerships, all of that. We cover finance. Again, there can be really good outcomes there. I want to do my filings on time. I want to do my tax filing on time, or my accounting on time, or I'm trying to raise capital, and therefore for that I need 10 intros to venture capital companies, or I need to create my info memo, or business model in order to kind of, go into the fundraising round. So outcomes are quite easy to identify there as well. So finance is the second domain, sales, finance. Then we work in compliance. Again, quite straightforward to develop outcomes. You're going for a licensing, you want to get an audit done, or whatever it is really. You want to get a certification. So again, outcomes are sort of very, very straightforward to define, and that's what we try and get the business and the specialists to do. A fourth sector that we work in is ESG. So there we see a big shortage of specialists, and that could be ESG sales, ESG compliance, lots of different sort of functions. But ESG is very much a vertical for us. And then finally, we are seeing demand, and therefore we are sort of really fine tuning at the moment and offering in the services space. So once a fintech or an enterprise tech or even a professional services company has sold a piece of work, they want to get the best specialist for customer success. So that's the fifth vertical that we are, at early stages of developing.
It's cool. Yeah, I think overall, like, setting those success criteria is definitely the best way to determine output. And
Yeah.
a lot of people will struggle with that if they after a freelancing basis, because if it's an ongoing retainer, that's when you may get kind of caught into a gray area. And you said compliance. I would have thought compliance would be quite difficult even to determine sometimes because it's ongoing, and it's a bit slow.
Mm.
Compared to, let's say, if it's sales, it could be how many deals are closed or whatever. It's pretty binary. So for anyone, I think deciding that and determining success criteria, having those KPIs of, all right, 10 deals made, 8 have gone into meeting stage and 2 have been closed or something like that. Something
Mm.
like that
Mm. Mm.
is very important.
Yeah.
The last area I want to get into was around kind of building the platform. So it's a unique platform to begin with. It's very unusual, which I like, and it's very it could be quite challenging to kind of build. Marketplaces are inherently difficult to build. If you ever research into Amazon or eBay or any sort of marketplace like that, it's quite difficult to find the buyer to the seller and vice versa. What have been some of the challenges for yourself going from ground zero with this?
Yeah, that's right. And I'll sort of start on the marketplace point, right? And there's a wonderful book that has come out late last year by Andrew Chen at Andreessen Horowitz. I think it's called the cold start problem. Cold start are the keywords. So it's the cold start something. And really, the analogy is the cold start analogy is that you got a cold engine, old style, internal combustion engine running on some heavy fuel, and the engine needs to be hot in order for it to run. But the engine does not really heat up until it starts running. Right. So therefore, in those days, what they used to do was they either had a smaller engine which used to run on light fuel, and then you sort of, the smaller engine heats up the bigger engine, which then runs on cheaper heavy fuel, or you'd sort of crank it manually in order to start kind of turning it at a certain frequency, and then the engine sort of starts up. So this cold start problem absolutely applies to marketplaces, because in any two-sided or three-sided marketplace, if there are no buyers, there are no sellers, and there are no sellers, well, what can I buy there, right? So it kind of has to start from both sides. The first thing, I mean, of course, we took advice and we talked to people and all that. Once we kind of saw the demand from both the businesses and the specialist side, the next thing that we kind of said, okay, how do we create a platform? How do we create some sort of marketing engine in order to bring people to this platform? And of course, the classic model is, let's go and raise X amount of money. Let's hire a marketing agency. Let's get a chief marketing officer, perhaps a fractional chief marketing officer. Let's spend 3 months, 6 months building some basic technology, 1 month doing some, positioning in the marketplace and so on. And then 6 months from now, we can, we can launch something. And that was one path. I mean, that's something that we could have taken in May, June sort of time frame. And we got some really good advice on the back of this whole cold start thinking from people from the West Coast, actually. Andrew Chen and around, as well as, other people that, that have experience in building marketplaces. And they kind of said, look, you got to pare it back. What we really need to find are lots of small atomic networks, and lots being, more than one, maybe 2, maybe 5, whatever. Some atomic networks, really small networks, where the buyers and the sellers, or in our case, ambitious businesses and fractional specialists, they can interact with each other. They can do some deals, and then see, do they scale? Do they start sort of going up in volume by themselves? If not, what needs to be done to get them to kind of move up? And then, you try that with a few atomic networks. And then once some of them start moving up, that's when a lot more marketing, a lot more technology platform, a lot more work starts to become valuable. So yeah, I mean, rather than kind of going into the back rooms for or the engine rooms for 6 months and building something and then launching, we literally launch the platform on the first day the company was registered. um, on the second day, we got our first customer. So the first atomic network, a customer being a business and a specialist, a combination basically, or two customers, if you will. And they started with the first engagement really, and then we learned from that engagement and getting the second business and the second specialist and the third business and the fourth and the fifth specialists and so on. And then we started to observe these atomic networks and then figuring out what works, what doesn't work, what can we do more of, what can we do less of. So all the tech that we built, we basically used a low code platform, which is totally transferable, which people normally use for selling, I don't know, secondhand books or sneakers or whatever it is really. We sort of said, okay, we'll use that and we'll modify it to
So
work
kind of
for
like
our.
kind of like a Shopify, is it?
Yeah, so we did not use Shopify specifically. We used
But
another
something
platform.
similar.
Yeah, but that's right. So we did consider Shopify, and we decided not to use Shopify, but we used something different. The platform is called ShareTribe. I think it's a Nordic company based in Finland, if I'm not mistaken. And we use their core platform to create our marketplace. The first version of the marketing, like once again, purely DIY, and then we sort of started to kind of place these atomic networks, started to see which networks are scaling up, which networks are not really scaling up, which networks are simply dying out. So all three directions were possible. And then the ones that were scaling up, how do we direct more marketing, more technology, more process towards those networks? So that's the path that we are following. It's been 6 to 7 months. Like I said, the business direction is going well. Feb this month is the first month that we will do over 10,000 pounds GMV, which is the sort of the which is one of the milestones on our journey that we had.
Of course, of course.
And yeah, I mean, our goal really is that later this year, perhaps by late summer, we get to 50,000 plus GMV, and then by the end of this year, perhaps 100,000 sort of GMV. That's the sort of the that's the bootstrap style scaling that we're working towards.
What was the biggest challenge you think with even getting those customers? Because like
Yeah.
it's kind of like the first last mile kind of like dilemma is like, when you're building a platform and you're attracting people, how do you get those people on the platform? Like what's the value add you can give a business? Or like, is it your network? Because I know you're super well connected, you're super well experienced, or like how does that work?
Yeah, I mean, look, on the business side, or actually on the specialist side, both of them, we kind of break it down into multiple levels, right? So we get leads from networks. So absolutely, that's important. That's almost how every startup company has to start, right?
Referrals.
The founders or the management team has to leverage its their own network. So that's important for us. The second strategy that we use, and frankly, we are fine tuning on all of them, is around email marketing, right? So can we inform people that this new service is now available? So if you are an ambitious business, you should consider this, or if you are a specialist in area X or area Y, you should sort of consider this platform. So email marketing. Third, social media marketing. Again, doing it ourselves, taking the help of external agencies. What can we do on LinkedIn? Over time, what can we do on Twitter? What can we do on Instagram? Some people advise Facebook, whatever. So social media marketing. Fourth thing, which is actually working very well for us, and that's the one that we are very, very keen on developing, is how can we use what I call business influencers. So people who are not necessarily they're not really business owners or running businesses, or they may be, but what they are is they're somebody who are looked up to in a particular sector or in a particular segment, in a particular location, whatever it is, in a particular network. And if we can go and convince them or this particular key individual of the value, and then sometimes
100%, yeah.
and then they kind of recommend it to their network, and sometimes, of course, even with some sort of a commercial agreement, that sort of helps us attract
Yeah,
more
I think
businesses.
I think with that as well is that that's a huge opportunity because like, in the early stages of those startups, you know those early entrants come into it, or customers or whatever, if you will, become brand ambassadors for the
Yeah,
product. And if
yeah.
you can use someone, I'm thinking of someone like Simon Ree in particular, who has a
Mm,
huge
mm,
following, like a lot of people
mm.
like love him. I
Yeah.
think he's a great dude, and he's a
Mm,
fantastic figure. If he it's different, it's difficult for his business and for anyone to know he has a particular like kind of finance trading kind of
mm,
course now that
mm.
he's working on. But he's a really good example because
Yeah,
if he became like a brand ambassador for the program, and then there is a commission because there's no problem with
mm.
that. If it's ten
Yeah,
percent of that intermediary fee, I think that is huge because that's what influencer
mm.
marketing is. But this is the
Yeah.
business marketing element of it, which is
That's right.
really good. And then
Yeah.
you just get a good couple of people that expand through those areas. So if it is even other startups who as a CEO, as CEOs or founders or whatever, and they can become influential factors.
Yeah,
I think that's incredibly powerful because it's just
yeah.
a social proof, isn't it? Social equity, social proof. So
Exactly
everything on the
right.
internet is built around.
Exactly right. Yeah. So yeah, business influencers is another sort of area that we are developing, and has actually worked well for us. We like it. And then finally, look, once you get to a certain stage, so on our platform, we've got a couple of dozen businesses. We have 50, 60 specialists. So once it gets to a certain size, you get to, and this already is enough size, we're finding. Just going back to them to say, what more can we do? How can we do more, within the community, right? What other connections can we build? If it's worked well in your business in area X, can we apply it to area Y? All of that really. So selling to people who are already using it, right? Expanding their use. So those are the six sort of things really. I mean, we started, of course, with sort of personal networks of me and the other founders. We have tried content marketing, we've tried social media marketing. We definitely have, and we'll continue to work on those. We definitely are very keen on business influencers. I think our third deal came through a business influencer. So, we just love that actually. And then, of course, selling within the community and making more connections possible within the community.
Cool, man. Cool, yeah. Because I think that's what people struggle with at the beginning starting is the fact that they don't have the connections, they don't have the allies essentially in the market to give
Mm,
them that kind
mm,
of
mm.
reach. So you've been able to kind of solve that kind of marketing issue more so than people ever think of because they usually build
Mm,
a product people don't want or they
mm,
have a product that they can't market. So I think you
mm,
might have
mm,
a nice
mm.
kind of combination of both.
Yeah,
So
yeah,
what do
yeah.
you
I mean,
think
our
again?
thinking, yeah,
Go ahead.
our thinking really is that rather than adding features, it's always good to kind of try out existing features with more customers and really discover demand at this early stage, as opposed to kind of saying, well, I know what the target state demand is, let's build to that. Of course, that's a very successful strategy. Apple, of all people, has invented markets and on the back of their products and things like that. But at least our strategy is really, we think there is demand, let's discover exactly where it is with a small set of features rather than adding a lot of features, a lot of technology to the product.
Yeah, it's all driven by customer feedback. I don't give a shit.
Mm,
As
mm,
everything is customer feedback because the product you're
mm,
building is for the customer. The product's not building for you. Like obviously you're incredibly experienced. You know exactly. What you think. You know what the demand is, but until you launch and get that
yeah.
feedback, you don't know what people clicked
Mm,
on. You don't know
yeah.
what feature people engage with, and
Yeah.
what are some of those kind of like essentially just metrics you need to analyze, and you'll be
Mm,
often really surprised.
yeah.
You'd be
Yeah.
very, very surprised at what worked, what didn't work, what you felt was really in demand, wasn't actually in demand, and vice
Yeah.
versa. So we can kind of adjust that way, uh,
Totally.
which is pretty cool. So to wrap up, where can people find yourself, your platform, and all those kind of good details?
Yeah. So yeah, look us up on LinkedIn, Project Brains. Look me up on LinkedIn, Somil Goyal, or our website, projectbrains.io.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Simone. I really appreciate it.